Well, hello, friends. Welcome. Wednesday, 27th of December. This is the 30th in our series of Lazarus symposiums. And don't ask me how many hundreds of hours of live broadcasting that's been. But the key piece here is that we brought forth hundreds of seminal voices in the sciences and the arts, elevating art, beauty, and consciousness, and serving to really create a narrative to resurrect the human spirit in this great era of COVIDiocy, which was the point of the Lazarus Initiative, to really begin an open-ended inquiry and narrative that could conjure the best of ourselves in front of ourselves so that we could emerge from this galactic sleep cycle as a collective act of consciousness. That video that we just played, which was poorly edited. It should have had the date line edited out at the end of it. I apologize. But that shows that that was the narrative that we were setting in 2021. And I edited that film and made that film to really set the tone for this initiative. Now, after the last couple of years, 2.5 odd years, we've obviously grown and expanded our repertoire. I've certainly expanded my repertoire very, very substantially, courtesy of Lazarus and courtesy of the geniuses that we've brought forth in every aspect, in every discipline you can imagine. So I've now reached, in a sense, a fulmination. And that's where I feel I've arrived at in this journey of inquiry. To repeat myself, I thought that this was going to be a one-year symposium initiative. I thought we would have a dozen marathon symposia, and I thought that we would pretty much get to the gist of it at the end of that and be able to wrap up the symposium and the Lazarus Initiative and say goodbye. And then what we discovered at the end of the first year was, baby, we just mind-fucked ourselves into a next chapter of upshift. Psycho-intellectually and spiritually, and where we wanted to take this exploration. And courtesy of you guys, the audience and the membership of the Lazarus inward-looking community, and feeding back also from what you've thought and said and fed back to us, we determined to continue. And here we are, moving somewhat rapidly towards our third year. I mean, by March, April, it'll be 3 years, which is substantial. And I'll be blunt with you. It seems to me that the Lazarus Symposium is only just now getting into its stride. So I'm desperately excited. I feel that there's a fulmination and a culmination in a sense, but only in the sense that I am now getting ready for an even greater upshift and upswing in where we're taking this initiative. And today's opening segment, this next couple of hours, is my attempt and the attempt of my colleagues who are coming on in a moment, two exceptionally gifted, talented, insightful oracles. In my view, these are oracles. These are people who also have the scrying dish of their human heart fully actualized. And that's why I chose them. Many of the speakers we've had on and panelists are similar. David Sarita is a Magus. Dan Winter is a Magus. Dave Emery is a Magus. I could name really pretty much all of the folks that we brought forth, and each of them also have this capacity to see and to divine this extraordinary journey that we're on as a species. But the two folks I'm bringing forth in this particular panel are specially selected for this piece. Why? What I'm trying to do here is to compress the evils of history as we understand them into a singularity, into a kind of bite-sized piece, and then put that to the side, and then step back and look at that compression of evil, of war, disease, poverty, ritual satanic abuse, alien interventionism, all of the diabolical contrast that is manifested in this realm of expression that we have on record. Let's look at it. Let's be so subjective, forgive me, objective, and take the entirety of our experience in history and archaeocosmology and so on, all of the modern psyops, all of the horrors that assail us, and put them to the side, step back and look at that in entirety. That's my objective. It's my objective. Why? Because it's my conviction that only once we're able to do that, again, psycho-intellectually, to remove our own individual psycho-emotional response or identification to evil, to contrast, to darkness, to time, to fear. Only once we can do that, collectively, are we likely to move into this morphogenetic upshift that we all know is the big event horizon. It's the one that we're all waiting for. The real event horizon, the second coming, the messianic privilege, the cosmic ejaculation. All of that stuff is about what I'm describing here. And we're only going to get to that as a collective consciousness in action. That is the purpose and the meaning of will. So that old dialectic of free will versus destiny, we've tried to explain it. I've certainly tried to. Dave Emery's tried to explain it. We've all variously looked at these subjects and the indivisible line between the black and the white checkerboard of the kingdom of the devil. We've looked at all these subjects from a genetics perspective, from a hyperdimensional perspective, from the extraterrestrial cosmogenetic perspective, from every fucking perspective you could shake a stick at. We have drawn in, pulled in, and circumambulated and looked at and scrutinized. Now, let's throw the whole lot together in one shit show, which is what this is. We should have called this shit show, the A to Z of Psyops. Actually, that would have been a really good title. I can see Jane's agreeing with me, and Dave, and Dan from the green room, and Christy. But the point being this: let's do that in the next couple of hours. Let's look at the entirety of the mind fuckery that has assailed humanity and humankind in the last thousands of years, and then let's step into a new format of how we reckon with ourselves in the knowing that we are the ones who manifested it. It didn't happen to us arbitrarily. That's not how divine geometry works. That's not how the mind of God works. Everything is perfect in the geometry of now, always in all ways. That's your start point, and that's the omega point as well. That's the only way we can access joy, bliss, serendipity. Through absolution, redemption is our salvation to be found. So let's move into that space. Let's try and do it collectively. That's what this noble initiative and symposium is all about. I know that you as the audience are equal to that journey. Christy, can you put the Lazarus slide on, please? And you guys are equal to it. Spread the word. Try to also help promote Lazarus Initiative, because I want this to grow now into more of a movement, a social movement in the next year into 2025. Now, by the end of today's segment, you're going to understand why what we're about to embark on is historic. Okay? I know that you know that I am given to sensationalism and flowery words. That's part of my repertoire. But for my sins, I do also accomplish things. And we've done big things in the past. We've founded, things like the International Tribunal for Natural Justice. We've mounted massive tours to bring about a resurrection in the spirit. We have launched the Arise Guerrilla News Network, frontline activism journalism at its very finest, and completely open source and free. We don't do it for money. The Lazarus Initiative has proven in the last 3 years that we bring the very best of progressive vanguard minds, technologists together, and thinkers together to help pierce the Hermes veil. So there's a huge repertoire of work there. Now we're going to move into even greater undertakings. And you will know by the end of this segment today how big that is and why I'm inviting you as the Lazarus audience and a greater audience, because this is an open source segment. We want to bring your attention into what we are about to unveil to the world. I'm just going to open up an image and pull that up on my screen in a moment. I'm calling this campaign / movement that we're about to unveil, I'm calling it loosely the Circle of Humanity, okay? And it is a resurrection of the eternal mother, is the mood that we're setting here. Or the eternal mother sits well with me. People speak in terms of the divine feminine. I personally find that a fairly reprehensible term, but I understand it. For me, it's about a return to Gaia, a return to Tara, a return to the sacred soil, a return to the life giver, the nurturer, the healer. Okay, to get rid of the fucking Catholic Church and the intervention of the third party, all third party intervention. Get out. Get thee behind me, Satan. That's the parent corporation. That's Catholicism. That's monotheistic religious bullshit, zealotry. All of that stuff you could throw into one basket and bin it. And that's the point. So we talk in terms of, once upon a time, ... What does that mean to you? For me, it means that we are going to very soon be writing the script ourselves, okay, as a species. We're taking it from here. No further interventionism, no further Catholic Church, no further priesthoods, no further doctrines and dogma and scriptures which have been completely violated and defiled and misinterpreted and have become the utility of the devil. We all know that to be true. We know that religiosity bore all the wars in modern history and have brought about the destructivity of the fabric of human soul. So let's not go there again. Now let's own the Christed mantle, take the story forth. The circle of humanity is a complex narrative that is going to weave together history, power, control, sacrifice, and redemption, beginning with the doctrines of discovery that issued through the Vatican and the Roman Catholic Church, which was where the license was given. Follow this closely. The license was given to the imperial crowns of Europe, essentially, to go forth and conquest the world and to murder the black skin, brown skin, red skin, and yellow skin people of the world with impunity in the name of God. Okay? That was what religion and religiosity and scriptural misrepresentation and dogma has done. It has fucked us from A to Z as a species, as a planet, as a chronology of civilizations. So here we take a whole new perspective on the journey. We're going to be with Dan Willis and Jane Evershed. We're going to be essentially resetting the whole goddamn paradigm as best as we can. And then you, the audience, are going to feed back to us, and we're going to help to formulate how we then take this narrative forward. And just by way of introduction here, Dan Willis, who's new to Lazarus, is a top secret military witness who testified at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. in 2001. Do you remember that very, very famous event that was put together? He's dedicated his career to unveiling, it was Dr. Stephen Greer, has dedicated his career, Dan Willis, to unveiling hidden advanced technologies derived from extraterrestrial reverse engineering. So yeah, you heard that right, friends. This military vet is at the tip of the spear of bringing benevolent alien technologies to the world at large to remedy and remediate all the problems and the ills of the world, in simple terms. After a denied congressional hearing aimed at releasing these technologies, Dan spent a decade collaborating with international scientists and inventors to find an energy solution, but halted these efforts due to the suppressive control structure. Well, my audience know all about that because I've been involved in that game 2 decades as well. This knowledge of his was expanded upon in 2022 when he began communicating with off-planet scientist Jen Han Aradion from the planet Era through a quantum communication implant that is inside the skull of Elena Danaan, who has appeared on this symposium before. You all know and love the woman. And through her, the Galactic Federation of Worlds, essentially, and through the emissary of the Galactic Federation of Worlds, there is a direct line of communication to Elena Danaan. And Dan is pretty much beside her and doing the direct communications with Jen Han Aradion. Okay, he's currently developing something called the Frill Generator Crystal. That is not the same as Vril, albeit there is a kind of crossover which he may go into. And that's a technology shared by Jen Han Aradion through the agency of Elena Danan to Dan. And so Dan's team of scientists, engineers, then build the technology, which is gifted through this medium, extraordinary medium. Of course, that's how it's done. How do you think we invented everything in the history of mankind that was of any consequence? How the fuck do you think Einstein and Carl Jung and Khalil Gibran and any of the great artists and scientists and engineers, everything of monumental import comes through the medium of the lower astral realms, one way or the other, into the minds and the hearts of human beings. There are channels, there is clairaudience, there's clairvoyance, there's extraterrestrial abductions and interventions, there are implants. It's all part of the repertoire of how our species have been historically connected to the extraterrestrials. In this case, we're dealing with very benign, very advanced, very evolved, incredibly kind beings and entities, and we're very blessed to introduce Dan Willis to this audience. Dan, just a quick hello from you to the Lazarus Symposium.
What a pleasure and honor to join you, Sacha. Yeah, this is so important that we're on this timeline on our planet, which is transitionary. It's so important to educate the public that has been falsely indoctrinated from birth into the world that we currently experience, and that it's important to understand how we have derived to where we are today in order to transform it into the world that all of us in our heart know can exist on this planet. And man, it's an extreme honor. Thank you for having me.
Well, beautiful. Thank you. So very, very welcome. Very, very happy to have you. And I'm also going to bring forth my beloved Jane Evershed, who calls herself a mere humble mortal, an artist. She's a great deal more than that, I can tell you. She is, for me, the spirit of the eternal mother incarnate in many, many ways. She's also lead researcher with the New Earth University. I've given her that designate because she's just incredible. She doesn't stop. She's been investigating the fabric of reality for a very, very long time. She comes forth with incredible revelations. So she, for me, is that spirit of the true mother in that sense, because she's one, healing and nurturing and creative and affirmative in all that she is and all that she does. But more than that, she wields a fucking battle axe, and you better stand back because she's, like I, dedicated to pure truth and will broker no bullshit in the pursuit thereof. Darling girl, you are so very welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
It's fantastic to be here, Sacha. I've really enjoyed my history with you, all the way back to Ancient Futures in Bali, the Bioweapons Conference, and Standing Rock over there in Bali. That was amazing. Are you ready for my battle axe?
Yeah, well, I was born ready for your battle axe, but indeed I am. Dan has prepared a short presentation, which he's going to do his best to compress in the next 10 to 15 minutes. Dan, is that feasible?
Oh, I will try. Talk about compression.
Try to do that. The reason being, we've got a hell of a lot to get through, as you both know. And then we've also got to bring this audience in. We've got a very big audience, incidentally, looking in. I'm very pleased to see the numbers so far. Exceptional, I have to say. But this is big stuff, folks. Put your seatbelts on. Put your crash helmets on. Dan Willis, take the floor. I'm going to share your screen, and we'll toggle between the presentation that you're giving us and your beautiful face. So crack on.
Okay, this slide presentation is basically related to the psychological operations and the extraterrestrial factor I've been researching for quite some time. And I'm going to turbo through this, so hang on to your seat. Here we go. Okay, this is, it seems like kind of an out there kind of statement, but it was detected 357 years in the future. There was a galactic-wide tyranny which they traced back to our planet, Earth, Moon, Mars, and they alerted the Galactic Federation of Worlds. Now, this will come into play later in this presentation, but it's important to understand how this originated. Okay, back in the beginning of the 20th century, you have the big banking elite, J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, Warburg, who was responsible for the Federal Reserve. They bought up 25 of the main newspapers and put in their own editors to control the public's perception. This is the mindset to move forward on what their agenda is. Tavistock Institute became the center for the study of mind control, propaganda, social manipulation. It's been very instrumental through the decades. Edward Benades, father of public relations is what they called it, the nicer word for propaganda, where they knew how to manipulate the masses using psychological warfare. Now, what happened back that created this galactic-wide tyranny is back in the early 1930s, the Draco of the Sakar Empire, they violated the Prime Directive, which was established and gave the Nazis advanced technology. We're a stage 2 civilization. The Draco was a stage 3 civilization. In other words, they had developed interstellar travel capability, and you were not supposed to interact with the lower. And so this threw everything off. The Nazis, they knew that documents show that they had a plan to infiltrate into the United States and create a matrix of perception. They called this plan Balkan-Schauenskrieg, which translates to worldview warfare, to hide their secret operations. Alan Dulles, they bring in thousands of Nazi spies into the CIA, which originally was the OSS. It goes into a long story, but let's just say that Truman was afraid of the Soviets, and so they had the intelligence that they traded in order to bring in thousands of these Nazi spies into what is today the CIA. Operation Paperclip, a lot of people familiar with this. They cleansed the dossiers of thousands of Nazis that were once classified to be a menace to the security of the United States. History, you think this would be illegal? You know, they actually rewrote the Rockefeller Foundation, the history of World War II, to hide the Nazi escape and infiltration. For school children in the future studying history won't put this together. The Center of Disease Control is actually formed in 1946 with 1,600 former Nazi scientists, people responsible for human experimentation, eugenics, murder, into the Center of Disease Control. Xavier Dorsch was Nazi Germany's top underground base expert, which they brought under Paperclip to start tunneling in New Mexico to create a network of deep underground military bases that people have no idea what's going on under those bases. The Roswell crash, everybody's familiar with, 1947. They covered it up. It was actually the Nebu Greys that it was a Trojan horse that was prepared for the invasion that they were going to initiate. And this kind of teased the teased the military with this advanced technology that they couldn't figure out. Of course, right after that, 3 elements were created: the CIA, which Alan Dulles, Truman didn't want to have it, but he insisted that the CIA needed to be created. The Department of the Air Force, which was used to be the Army Air Force, now you have a new Department of the Air Force, and the first MJ-12 group, which was the group that controlled the extraterrestrial issue. Because the Nazis had this advanced technology, James Forrestal had Admiral Byrd sent down to attack the Nazi base in Antarctica. He was completely defeated. All the craft were wiped out by advanced anti-gravity craft with directed energy weapons. 1948, about 100,000 televisions are now in homes. It's a primary communication tool for propaganda warfare. Interesting statement by Hal Becker. It says, I know the secret of making the average American believe anything I want them to. Just let me control television. You put anything on the television set, it becomes reality. If the world outside the TV set contradicts the images, people start trying to change the world to make it like the TV set images. So, you know, human see, human do. It was a very, very powerful tool, television. 1949, James Forrestal, Secretary of the Navy. He wanted the public to know about the Nazi base and the extraterrestrials and the whole situation. MJ-12 murdered him, throwing him out the hospital window. MJ-12 report later revealed the untimely death of Secretary Forrestal was deemed necessary and regrettable. 1950, Operation Mockingbirds, created by Alan Dulles, where the CIA is paying 400 media journalists to create the perceptions of the public by giving them the information. Hey, you're going into the checkout stand on the grocery. You've got Generoso Pope. He was trained at the CIA disinformation to put out discrediting. So people look at this about extraterrestrials and I think, oh, this is just crazy stuff, you know. So you wanted, the purpose is to discount this in the public mind. So they think the extraterrestrial issue is just people who are making up crazy stuff. Why we're still using gasoline, coal, dangerous nuclear is the Invention Secrecy Act of 1951, which actually came about in 1952. Anybody that has anything like an anti-gravity device, free energy device, over 6,000 currently have been suppressed. The inventor will receive a national security order. I had 10 years experience at this meeting with scientists and inventors. It says your invention has been deemed to be a detriment to the national security of the United States. Therefore, you cannot share it with anybody. So we have incredible inventions that have been withheld and kept our planet technologically hijacked. The Nazis, to intimidate the Truman and Eisenhower administration, they do a show of force over the Capitol building, 1952. Now, James Forrestal was one of the first MJ-12 members. After his death, he was replaced by CIA Director Walter Smith, who sends a message to use the psychological warfare purposes for the subject of flying saucers. The Robinson panel, formed by the CIA, of course, more to discredit the UFO subject. There's some kind of noise in the background. Do you hear that, Sacha?
I'm not hearing any noise. Are you, Christy?
Oh, okay. Okay, 1954, a critical meeting. President Eisenhower meets with the Galactic Federation of Worlds, who warn him about the Nibiru gray extraterrestrials. And according to witnesses that were there, like Gerald Wright, it was his conviction, he wrote, that President Eisenhower planned to go on radio and television, publicly disclose this to the people. But what happened was MJ-12, the newly created MJ-12, headed by Alan Dulles, was circumvented. And so they were enticed by getting some technology. And so what they did was they traded abducting millions of our civilization for their hybrid program. And this was from 1947, the Trojan horse, you could say, from the Nibiru, to get them to want this technology. And so they basically sold out our planet for the hybrid program and gave them, operations underground to continue. And this is how they plan to infiltrate into our planet, the Nibiru. 1954, former Nazi SS sets up secret Bilderberg meetings, which they control the mainstream media, along with the Council of Foreign Relations and others. Every year they have these secret meetings. 1955, February, Eisenhower lost control. The Nazi Draco-Orion alliance. He had to enter into a surrender agreement. From this point forward, and this is how I got involved as a top secret witness, because every single president, CIA director, heads of intelligence from this point forward have been denied access. Admiral Wilson, head of intelligence, was denied access, and that's what brought about the 2001 event. This is interesting, you know, in the aspect of Weltanschauungskrieg, worldview warfare, the Nazis wanting to, and their connection with the occult, and the idea that there was Professor Hans Eysenck of the University of London said there was a global effort. Hundreds of universities, they went to silence the truth about the powers of human consciousness to affect reality. They didn't want the public to know that the power we have in order to affect the collective reality that we all experience. NASA's created and run by a former Nazi SS officer, keeping us believing we need rockets to overcome gravity, whereas the Nazis were fully aware they had understood the torsion physics of anti-gravity and had anti-gravity craft developed back in 1934. So this was part of keeping us technologically retarded, I guess you could say, from it advancing. Kennedy wanted to get the information out to the public about the extraterrestrial issue. 10 days after he put out a top secret memo, he was assassinated. This was due to an assassination directive that was written by MJ-12 member Alan Dulles. Afterward, the Warren Commission said it was just a lone gunman, you know, and they wanted to label anybody that was questioning the official narrative as a conspiracy theorist. And this is in common use today. This is an interesting thing. You know, all the people who love Star Trek. Actually, the Galactic Federation of Worlds working with the Office of Naval Intelligence. They gave the script to Gene Roddenberry in order to seed the collective mind on our planet about the concepts of, you know, the prime directive, warp drive, teleportation, this type of thing. The CIA wanting to have greater control. In 1983, there was like 50 media corporations. So every year since 1983, the CIA meets with all the head of the media every single year. And what they've done from that point forward is they consolidated it down to only 6 main media corporations, which they centrally control the narrative in order to support the agenda. Today, the members of the Bilderberg, Council of Foreign Relations, Trilateral, top executive positions in the mainstream media. This was something I was involved in. Actually met with Bob Lazar in 1993, and the base kind of freaked out about the meetings outside, and they issued an NRO document, and Dr. Greer somehow acquired that, which showed these unacknowledged special access programs that were reverse engineering extraterrestrial craft. He brought it to a meeting with Vice Admiral Thomas Wilson, who was the head of the intelligence for Joint Chiefs of Staff, fairly high level. He was not only denied access, like the CIA director, James Woolsey, was back in 1993 when Dr. Greer had a meeting with him, but he was threatened that to drop a matter immediately or face an early retirement and lose rank. And he told Dr. Greer, well, as far as I'm concerned, if you can get your people to know about this matter to talk on record, in other words, willing to testify under oath, you have my permission to go to the mainstream media with this. This group is illegal. He wanted the public to know that there's these illegal government operations that happened. This is ever since Eisenhower lost control. And so in 2001, 21 witnesses, we have backed by over 500 military intelligence witnesses. How many do you need? Even if you had 50,000 military intelligence witnesses with documents and things, if you control the mainstream media, it doesn't matter. He had his life threatened. 21 of them gave their testimony, and each stated that they're willing to testify under oath before the 22 cameras of the mainstream media of the world at the National Press Club. I was one of those witnesses that testified. Some of the things were disclosed, such as my friend Mark McCandish. We had faster than light craft that was developed back in the 1950s called alien reproduction vehicles. He was said to commit suicide before testifying at the June 2021 hearing to reveal that the U.S. has this technology. But it seems that the government doesn't want the public to know that they have developed this technology a long time ago. Brenner von Braun's deathbed testimony was that there was a series of planned false flag events. The next one that was in line was a terrorist event, which actually happened 4 months later in September of 2001. And the final event was to be a false flag alien invasion. And, you know, if they have the technology to pull it off, it could be possible. And so the mainstream media, myself being an ex-ABC newsman, I noticed how they all did in lockstep. All the media made it sound as though we wanted to have a congressional hearing simply on the reality of UFOs, not disclosing the illegal secret government operations that Admiral Wilson wanted us to disclose to the public. CBS interviewed me. I said, I'm not doing the interview unless I can say we have the scientists that can prove within these black projects that we have a solution to get off nuclear, oil, and coal. They promised afterward. The producers, I never had this happen before, but the higher executives made me cut that part out. So it made me aware that the media is controlled at a higher level. It inspired some people. They caught it on some of the channels. Gary McKinnon, a UK computer hacker, revealed the US Navy Solar Warden secret space program. This program was initiated back in the 1940s with the Galactic Federation of Worlds, was working secretly with the US Navy. Since the CIA and the Air Force kind of got collectively brought into this whole thing back with Eisenhower, where they lost control, the Navy was doing its own program secretly. So the Galactic Federation of Worlds worked with them to develop the Solar Warden secret space program, which launched in the 1980s. And this is wonderful news. In 2021, the Galactic Federation of Worlds working together with the Earth Alliance. The Earth Alliance is our military factor that you could say we're two civilizations. One is a class 2 and the other is a class 3 civilization. Our class 2 is in our normal reality that we have. In this other world, which involves the Solar Warden program, advanced technologies, holographic medical technologies, incredible technology is hidden by this veil of secrecy and deception. And they've been working behind the scenes because of what happened back in the 1930s and the Nibu. Interfering with our civilization. It allowed, because of the Prime Directive, because you cannot interfere with a evolving race, the Galactic Federation of Worlds was able to clear out the Nibu Greys, the Draco of the Sakaar Empire, and the Dark Fleet Nazis, Nakwaffen as they're called, out of our solar system. So what we have now is basically now just the Earth minions to deal with. A disclosure plan was given by the Galactic Federation of Worlds in January, the beginning of this year, soon to be next year, and it's currently activated to assist in a greater awakening of humanity so that we may identify and use a rule of law to bring justice to the criminals of humanity in order to liberate our planet and bring about a beautiful future. So that is my super turbo slideshow.
Jane, just your immediate reflections on the slides that Dan just brought up and his narrative.
Well, he pretty much covered it from the spaceman angle. Did a great job, and it was very thorough. And like all psyops, they all interweave with all the other ones. They're also never ending, and they go from one to the other. So if you don't mind, I'm going to just throw my list out there because I don't feel that I need to go into any details because he's basically given us a good overall cover for them.
I want you first to do your piece, and then I want to try to consolidate the narrative into the context of what it is that I'm trying to accomplish with Lazarus, which is, again, compress evil empire and the history, the dark history, what brings us to the perfect now, and then step away from that, and then talk about the absolution, redemption, and how we're taking forward the circle of humanity, the blood song, the resurrection of the tribes of humanity, and the rainbow, all of that stuff, and get into that narrative. So I'm very flexible, however you want to play, but you've got the floor for the moment.
Okay, well, I'd like to be a representative of the Eternal Mother and bring her in now while it's early so we can start incorporating her into the big vision.
Very good.
So,
very good.
First of all, Sacha, you don't like the term divine feminine, I see, but it is very important because although we're using the Eternal Mother, we're not just dirt and soil and from the earth, we are flesh and blood, and the Eternal Mother herself never has even had an opportunity to get her little toe in the doorway of this realm thus far. So we have to really take on this feminine and woman thing in a big way because it's the balance of the male and the female and the child. They've tried to tell us that it was the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost for a long time, and we've believed it, but it's not. It's the mother and the father and the creation of them, the child. So we've got to get there straight away and start recognizing, listening to, and it's not just women, it's all the indigenous tribes as well that did embrace the Eternal Mother. Yes. And they too were wiped out for their cosmic wisdom and their reverence for the mother. So this is a huge part of whatever you want to call it. Is it healing? Are we moving into an age of enlightenment, the age of Aquarius? Whatever it is, it's a big, big part of it. And it's been one of the biggest psyops from the very beginning because it was the Elohim that came down from earth, mated with the women, and from them was the very first hierarchy on earth. Before that, hierarchy didn't even exist. And now what we're seeing is the very first hierarchy was actually patriarchy. And that's why I say the Eternal Mother never even got a chance to put a little foot in the door. She couldn't go to church. She couldn't represent spirituality. She couldn't philosophize about the world and share her ideas and have all her ideas printed in books and published to the masses. She couldn't get it, and neither could the indigenous people. And that amounts to over half the world. It closes the door on everyone about the wisdom and everything that we have. I have as a woman and not being taken seriously 99.9% of my life. Thank you for honoring me to be here today, I must say. And it's been a long and kind of undivine and unsacred energy that's been flowing around. And so this is the shift that we have to make because the divine feminine has been in the dust for eons. And today all we really have is the invisible mother rather than the Eternal Mother.
Okay.
So what can I say? That's what I want to say about that.
Beautifully summarized, Jane. Of course, everything you're saying is entirely correct. However, to rebalance it, and this was the genesis point of this campaign, this initiative, the Once Upon a Time resurrection of the eternal mother, which for me is the seminal piece that has to come about, because if we don't do that bit, then we failed in the entire galactic cycle and the civilizational cycles and all the other attendant cycles of, social ecology and economics and all, everything else flatlines. And if we don't get this piece right, the resurrection of the eternal mother, the resurrection of the relationship between the sons and daughters of God and the sacred soil, that to me is what we're dealing with here. When we talk about the male patriarchy, female matriarchy dialectic, for me that's just another checkerboard dialectic, which is why I don't like the divine feminine. Why don't we talk in terms of divine male and the divine female? Why do we just not talk in terms of divinity itself as the source code and stop splitting infinitives? That's my argument. And I would say that the truth of the matter is that the matriarchy has been heralded in the past, and it wasn't eons ago, in my view, as recently as 100 years ago, 150 years ago. The foundational cornerstone of the entirety, more or less, of the American indigenous traditions was predicated on the grandmothers and the fact that no tribe could go to war without consultation with the mothers and the grandmothers and without the nod that came from them, which is actually what we're doing here, where you and I and Dan and Christy and our team are trying now to orchestrate a cogitative return to that as a necessary function of absolving and redeeming our ancestors and redeeming ourselves, and then moving into the future. So this image here, which is our image that we generated last week for the Lazarus Symposium, for this initiative today, which my very talented Eloy, one of our directors, and Christy have helped orchestrate using AI, incidentally, which I'm very happy to do in instances like this. The point is this: we are seeking to return all the Native American tribes of the Americas together, Midsummer's Day of 2025, okay? We're going to launch the campaign at Standing Rock later next year, hopefully Midsummer's Day. We're aiming at that. We'll consult with the elders, consult with the grandmothers. I have consulted with some paramount chiefs and some of the grandmothers, and thus far it all looks on track. But I'm agreeing with you absolutely, Jane, that we need to return the stick, so to speak, to the grandmothers. And how we fucked up as a planet, as a civilization in the last epoch has absolutely been because of a patriarchy which was installed, and it circumvented and took over the relationship between the indigenous peoples of the world and the sacred soil, aka the Eternal Mother. So that was the circumvention that occurred by the Roman Catholic Church, essentially by the Vatican conspiracy, by the papal doctrines of discovery. But by all means, Christy, throw slides in if there's anything to populate here. The papal doctrines of discovery 500 years ago began the process of installing patriarchy over the natural born innate relationship that existed between First Nation peoples all around the world and the mother and the natural law. And because I live in Bali, as you know, 18 months of the year. I know Southeast Asia, I know Africa, I know the Americas more or less. It's where I've been living, and I live in the Middle East as well. So the fundamentalization of religion in the Christian tradition initially, and then Islam, and the other religions, that has become the problem for sure. That's where the patriarchy was installed, and the cock of Baal, that was then the big totem and effigy installed all around the world, from the Eiffel Tower to the obelisks of the Caesars of Rome and all the rest of it. Yes, all of that. So we're in complete agreement here. I just say that there was a time when we were honoring the mother, And it was the indigenous peoples more or less that were doing the honoring and maintaining that relationship, that immanent relationship. And then it was broken. So our Psyops and what Dan, you and I are seeking to do now to discourse on is really about how that patriarchy was then kind of installed. The Eisenhower thing, the JFK thing, the Dulles thing, the gold, the King Solomon's. Yes, these are all male totems, absolutely. So discourse on that, but recognizing that there was a foundational connection between the First Nation peoples of the world, all around the world, and the mother, and that was what was broken.
Well, I think the greatest perpetrators of all are the Khazarians, who took over the Roman Catholic Church long, long ago, took over the Jewish faith long, long ago, and spread out all through Europe. They were the ones who took over the newspapers. If you go to the Protocols of Zion, it's all in there, claimed as a big hoax. It's all there, and all news issues from Israel throughout the world. Those are the people that really own it. And going back to divinity, Sacha, I'm not so much saying that the feminine is divine, but there's a male and a female divinity that is being thrown in the trash right now as we see these transgenders and all these aberrations they're creating through these surgeries of young people who haven't even decided who they are and if they're ever going to want children or anything. So from that perspective, the divinity of masculine and feminine is very important today. So that's just addressing two little things, but please go ahead.
Yeah, very good. Okay, thank you. Dan, any comments from you as we move forward?
Yeah, well, I totally agree with both of you. The balance. It's interesting. The Star Nations, they have this view of that we're all fractals of source and all exactly equal, unlike the kings and queens and everything. And there's also the reptilian aspect of the Vatican that and how working with the Nazis and everything. Anyway, that can go into a whole nother rabbit hole, but it's a factor.
Very good. Okay, well, let's start to try to track now the narrative. Believe it or not, friends, we're 1 hour into we're 1 hour in already, so we can expand this slightly. But let's move now into a chronology that's more or less been designated here. The sequestration, the historical background in the first instance. Okay, the experimentations of Francis Bacon and John Dee. Now, I'm no expert on Bacon or Dee, and actually I should be before I really desecrate their memory. I think they're very, very brilliant men in the same way that most people who are brilliant men or women in history have been a utility of the gods in a sense, and have brought through variously heaven and hell on earth, oftentimes unbeknownst to themselves. So I'm not suggesting that John Dee was a wicked man in the ilk of, Aleister Crowley, who I also don't particularly believe was a wicked man. But John Dee was certainly an archetypal historical figure, as was Francis Bacon. That they, in a sense, epitomized the kind of the torch carriers through the, medieval, the era of darkness, where everything was shrouded in darkness and secrecy and clandestine operations. And, at that time, 500 years ago, you can throw up Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen. So there we have it. By best accounts, a rabid slut in her day, but dressed up to look like this, and a remarkable archetype without any question of doubt. The question is, was this her, or was this the priesthoods around her? Was it the patriarchal priesthoods around her, which I rather suspect it was, totemizing her, creating her into this idea of the Virgin Queen? What are your thoughts there, Jane, whilst we're on this subject, incidentally? Just reference to Queen Elizabeth I.
Well, as far as Psyops go, how's this relating?
I don't know how to answer that question. It doesn't really matter, just in context of how I'm setting up the preamble here. Obviously, it's a psyop. That's why I'm saying, was it a priesthood around her who were engineering her as a totem?
You might think that she's a woman. She was probably a man. It's that deep. We can't know. Our history books are so bad, and the information they've given us is so full of lies that you can never truly research something to the depth that you would. And I'm waiting for this time when we get to the other side of all of this so that we can actually find out. And didn't you mention that you had a visit to the Vatican at some point in the future?
Yes,
I'm waiting for that.
Coming up imminently, as long as I don't give my game away too much and then get assassinated. So yes, we'll leave it at that.
Sorry, Sacha.
But I just find that this woman, sorry, Christy, I just did that. Forgive me. Sometimes I will jump in and take control. Thanks. So, this woman here is, for me, just archetypal because it was the onset of the patriarchy. The real patriarchy kicked off with her. Under her aegis, the dominion of empire really kicked off there. Sir Francis Drake, Francis Walsingham, all of these characters. That was the genesis point of the deep state, was Sir Francis Walsingham underneath her, and John Dee in her laboratory in the basement, financed by her, hooking up, bringing demonic energies and forms into chemistry, into the laboratory. That's the onset or the genesis point of synthetic molecules, as far as my work and research is concerned. I've traced it back to that. But most importantly, traced it back to the opening of the 9 gates of hell. The time when Hernan Cortez again landed on the coast of Mexico, planted the papal flag, and began dominion of the Americas. Right. Now we're talking. The patriarchy rolling out, the conquistadors, the doctrines of discovery, the Pope giving license to the Portuguese, the Spanish, the French, the English, the Dutch, the Belgians to go forth and massacre, genocide the black skin, brown skin, red skin, yellow skin people of the world with impunity in the name of God, moreover.
Right.
Sweet Jesus. If that wasn't the weaponization of the Christic faith, the full-fledged weaponization, where you turn God's law and God's mission into blood cult and genocide, sociopathic genocide. And that began, and that's how the crowns of Europe became conflated and wealthy and enriched. They became enriched because of the gold that they plundered and the slaves that they harvested, and the dominion, the conquest, the giving rise to the spice trade, the opium trade. So the Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company go forth and start cleaving the world, leading up to Cecil John Rhodes, the Oppenheimers and the De Beers going forth for the gold and the diamonds of Africa. So the India absolutely ravaged all the Polynesian islands, Hawaii, the desecration of the noble peoples of Hawaii and the Polynesians, Fiji, all around the world, the small island states that were holding their dignity, their sovereignty, and their relationship with the soil. So all of that fell within the thrall and the conquest of the crowns of Europe, conflated by the papal doctrines of discovery. That's the point here. That was the license, the spells and bonds on paper that gave rise to that mass genocide. So then that led us to weaponization of the biosphere. And I just will say, before I depart, that the historical context, the International Tribunal for Natural Justice, and my audience will know the ITNJ, and if you don't, go to www.itnj.org. We launched that court in 2015 and began in 2018 the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into human trafficking and child sex abuse. Our historic hearings and seatings at Westminster, London, changed the entire global narrative. We now know that. We know that, absolutely. We broke the silence on the subject in 2018. And I'm desperately proud of that work. It was God's work, and we did it in 2018. Robert David Steele, of course, was chief counsel, and we had the Bishop of Jerusalem and many great and noble law commissioners. Point being this, we then did in 2019 the judicial inquiry into the weaponization of the biosphere in Bali with Del Bigtree and Dr. Robert O. Young and Dr. Sandra Rose Michael and G. Edward Griffin and Jim Humble and a great many other, Dane Widgington, many of the leading figures in the world in geoengineering vaccination programs, all of that, GMOs. Jeffrey Smith, we began that judicial inquiry into the weaponization of the biosphere 6 months before COVID outbreak. We warned the world what was coming. And then, of course, the world was thrown into COVIDiocy for the last 2.5 years, almost 3 years. And that eclipsed all of our lives. Okay, but it also brought into sharp contrast the black and white checkerboard of the kingdom of the devil, right? And COVID is the end game, in my view. The mRNA intervention, the hydrogel, the Morgellons syndrome, the self-replicating nanodiodes and fibrils coming out of human beings all around the world, the parasites, the complete saturation of our biomes and our bodies with these fucking parasites and synthetic molecules, and the breakdown of our immune systems in all biological systems is connected to the synthetic molecules and the poisons that have been introduced through agrochemicals and petrochemicals and big pharma, all of which issued from the Rockefellers. And so we're going to speak about that stuff as well. But the weaponization of the biosphere, the exploration of disease as tools of control, the role of Psyops in health crises from smallpox given to the Native American Indians, okay, by white man's poison. Thank you, Vatican. So we did that. We infested their blankets with smallpox, a grotesque act of genocidal evil, white man's poison at its finest, beginning the massacre of the red-skinned peoples and the brown-skinned peoples of the Americas. We have to live with that until we redeem ourselves from it. And that's what the circle of humanity is about. That's what the reclamation of the eternal mother is all about. That's what this initiative and campaign that we're kicking out is all about. How do we go about looking at our history, acknowledging and addressing the part we've all played individually, incarnationally, culturally, civilizationally, genetically? We have to acknowledge this stuff in order to absolve it and move on. And then, of course, we've got to go into the power of Kundalini, life force. We'll talk about the explanations of the Kundalini, life force and prana, the vibral light that emanates from central sun, its role in manifesting creation, and how understanding this piece can empower humanity, empower us. Reclamation of our own divinity, essentially integral, that we start to write the story from here, resurrect ourselves from this Babylonian shroud of predictively programmed doom. And then, of course, Psyops and consciousness manipulation. In-depth look at historical examples of Psyops and how these operations lower frequencies and consciousness connection to major historical events and institutions. So, Dan, just your comments on the rambling narrative thus far.
I totally agree. When you look at what happened with the church back when it was created, and the hijacking of the whole religion, and about the extraterrestrials that played deceptive roles back then, that like Yahweh, which was actually Enil, that was a reptilian extraterrestrial that was asking for virgins and sacrifices and blood and murdering people. This was this was not a god. This was a trickster extraterrestrial. And when you think about the there's like this different mentalities. You have the Nazis, the kings and queens, the corporations, all these people in service to self, where they feel like other people aren't their equal. Versus like the Star Nations, they consider everybody, even though there's thousands of years evolved from us, they consider everybody on an equal level spiritually, because we're all fractals of source. And so we have this these dark elements on our planet that that's why the reptilians gained in an alliance with the Nazis that had the kind of a similar mindset, and so they moved on, and like the Navy spies that William Tompkins was talking about, the spies couldn't believe what they were reports they were giving back to Admiral Rick Oboda, that they were planning on going to other worlds and conquering other worlds. So you have this this mentality of that you're the elite, you get all the goodies for yourself. The rest of the people are expendable, and just pillage and take what they've got and enslave the rest. And so this is a disease of the human psyche that is needing to evolve. And as we evolve, it's going to be very difficult for people of that mindset to move into the higher densities that we're currently moving into.
Indeed. Beautifully stated. Thank you. Jane, let's just run through a few things. Christy, I'll start triggering a few slides because they've been very well titled, so I can see them here with my failing eyesight. I just want to run through a few of them as we build up this kind of, chronology, so to speak. So, we start King Solomon's Temple, kind of archetypal start point to our historical references. Jane, feel free just to jump in and bump into the narrative here, the importance of King Solomon's Temple in your view.
Well, I'm still back with Queen Elizabeth. If you don't mind, I just want to address a few things, because she wasn't all bad. She actually was the woman who stopped all the burning of the witches. So I want to acknowledge her for that part.
Very good.
And now that we're going back to King Solomon's Temple, what King Solomon's Temple represents to me is actually the real golden age. That was a golden age. It was a beautiful time. And, we are told that these ancient structures go all the way back from Tartaria back. But in my mind, I'd just like to place everything in perspective here, because it's really come to my attention that there's a period after the golden age where Satan gets his window. And this is where I think we actually are right now, because all of these satanic elements are just rearing their ugly heads left, right, and center. Every time you turn around, there's another satanic element being brought into our society. There's an after-school satanic meetings, all of these things. So I think what we really should do is acknowledge where we are so that we can face it head on. And now I'm going back to where all of these beautiful indigenous peoples were killed, murdered with smallpox. People went out and took they killed their bison. And what I'm having trouble with is that I didn't kill their bison. I didn't, and I won't. And I had no way to stop them. So where is that fine line? Because that I would like to be explained to me, because I wasn't aware, then I'm party to it, because I'm a human.
Yeah. Well, let's look at that. Let's look at that momentarily. Dan, by all means, jump in anytime. Let's look at that. As far as I'm concerned, we are complicit with it if we are living in the age of those atrocities and we're aware of them more or less, which we more or less are aware of it, depending on our cogitation. But the fact of the matter is that, you know, it goes back to that saying, Jane, all it takes for evil to prevail is for enough good people to do nothing. All it takes for the Babylonian edifice of the parent corporation to emerge is for enough idiots to pay fucking taxes. And all that it takes to create a dragnet bureaucracy that eviscerates all living systems is for enough idiot human beings to fill out their forms with block black capital letters. So each of us are complicit almost every step of the way with the diabolical status quo, whatever that status quo is, unless we are agrarian farmers living in idyll, tending to our flock. Granted, a lot of good humans are no part of the citadel. But the problem is that the citadel continues to become empowered. The Babylonian edifice, the governments, the fiefdoms and the realms and the kingdoms and the queendoms and the empires, they grew off the back of compliance and consent. 25 years of my diligent research and work as a frontline activist and humanitarian teaches me that much. So it is our compliance in the citadel that allows for evil empire to prevail. And so we are variously complicit with it.
I will counter that, please, because we were absolutely started from scratch at the reset. We had ignorant people coming in that they then indoctrinated and used, and through unilateral contracts at everyone that nobody ever saw or signed. Everybody's trying to regain, where did they land? Where did they come from? They're trying to find out. They're being lied to, and they're not getting anywhere. And it's taken years and years and years for us to get to this point where we've been able to read between the lines of history and figure it out for ourselves. It's taken a long time. The damage was so great. And we also, in the meantime, are running around trying to pay bills all day long. So I'm not going to absolve anyone of blame, but I am going to say that it's too hard on humanity to just say, you did it, you killed all the bison, you sent smallpox blankets, because those were all things that were set up. I'm going to go with Khazarian Mafia here all the way to the end of time, because they just changed their name through history. They were the ones who brought in the world fairs. And going back to one of my Psyops that I mentioned here is the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893, which was a huge mass consumption Psyop for us to all become materialistic and be so distracted by material goods rather than our deep spirituality that cared so much about our fellow Native Americans. And that one was specifically to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus's arrival in the New World. They were privy to all the books. They wrote all the history. Mr. Francis Bacon, who you were mentioning earlier, he was one of the people whom the king asked to rewrite the history, along with Joseph Scaliger, who threw in an extra 1,000 years. So I just don't want people just sitting around feeling guilty for complying. I don't think
that's not the idea, for sure. You're right about that. The idea is to accept the foundation piece here, which is that we steer our souls in the geometry of perfection into the now. We are not victims of anything ever, and that's my point. Is that if we believe ourselves to be victims of circumstance, well, our souls are drawn to a particular vector in so-called time space and a given spatial location, let's say planet Earth, you know, in fucking 1918, not a fun time, or 1939, not a fun time, you know, or 9/11, not a fun time. We are brought in through resonance and through soul frequencies. So it's always divinely anointed and appointed. The geometry of now is perfect always and always for you and me, with wherever we find ourselves. And that's the point I'm trying to get at, is let's not spend all of our energy looking over our shoulder, blaming and being embittered by circumstance. No, let's own the fact that we steered our souls into the vector in the here and now. And then from here in after, once upon a time, how do we write the story from here?
Well,
I'd like to.
Dan.
Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
Oh, I would just want to say I agree with both of you. I agree with Sacha that, once you become, it's so important what you're doing is in educating the people, because once you become aware of this, you become responsible for the situation. And I agree with Jane that we have been we've been hoodwinked, and so a lot of people are innocently clueless. I'd like to share an appropriate meme that I created, if I can, if you can put that up. I put this together because I thought these quotes were rather relevant to what we're talking about. Mark Twain: easier to fool the people than convince them they've been fooled. Zygmunt Brzezinski, he says, shortly, the public will be unable to reason and think for themselves. Soon they'll only be able to parrot the information they've been given on the previous night's news. That's currently, a lot of you can relate to people who do that. J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI director, he said, the individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous he cannot believe it exists. The American mind simply has not come to the realization of the evil which has been introduced into our midst. It rejects even the assumption that human creatures could espouse such a philosophy, which ultimately destroy all that is good and decent. And then Adolf Hitler, regarding the size of a lie. One started out with a very correct assumption that the size of a lie, there's a certain contain a factor of credibility. Since the great masses of people fall victim to a great lie rather than a small one, since they themselves also lie themselves in little things, but would certainly be too ashamed to tell a great lie, thus it would not enter their heads to tell a great lie, and they would not believe that others could tell such an infamous lie. Indeed, they will doubt and hesitate. Even after learning the truth, they will continue to think there must be some other explanation. Therefore, just for this reason, some part of the most imprudent lie will remain and stick, a fact which all great lying artists and societies of this world know only too well and therefore villainously employ. You can think of situations like 9/11 or anything that, people, that's the situation, is that these lies that, it's safe and effective, it's too, they fully villainously employ this this thing that Adolf brought up, that people can't comprehend that such evil is in control of all the mainstream media channels, and that there would be journalists that would speak out and say, wait a minute, this isn't right. No, they get fired immediately. So there's a certain percentage of the population that cannot comprehend such deceptions are being played upon them.
Okay, very good. Let's run through this chronology a little, or we're not going to get there at all today. And I think we needed to set again this to set the narrative. I just want to run through a few pieces. So obviously, we understand, the Ignatius Loyola Jesuiticism, which is really full weaponization, in my view, of the Vatican complex, the Illuminati issuing therefrom, Freemasons prior to that. And, as Jane mentioned, the world fairs being a seminal psyop that occurred. Robber barons. What does this image say to you, Jane? Be very brief in your explanation, but what does this image say to you?
Well, it looks like something's being destroyed. I can't quite see it as clearly as I'd like. I mean, lots of businessmen walking around in rubble. They're destroying. Are they destroying one of the World Fair places? What's going on in here?
Education system, 1903. Well, I think in 1908 was also a seminal dateline. All school books prior to that time have value. All school books after that time do not. And the central piece, curiously enough, is the ethos. Ethos removed from the periodic table in 1908. Can you believe that? The ethers. Prior to that, the understanding that we were transmitting cold electricity seamlessly, and that you had a very advanced understanding of the ethers, which is why those photographs that are now surfacing all around the world, the pre-1900 images of cities and towns and villages, all being powered up by best accounts through the fire, what we now deem to be old Victorian fireplaces and flues and chimneys. You know, we're talking about apparatus of arcane technologies that understood the vibral nature of light, of the etheric field. So that was a very important piece. And then, of course, 1952 was when the British Empire's dominion over learning was installed all around the world. 1952 was also another seminal piece in miseducation, in destroying the true knowledge that was out there with these fucking midnight masons that did a terrific job. Dan, what does this say to you?
I mean, the whole thing with J.P. Morgan and all that.
Yeah.
My God, what a trick, huh? They're saying that, some of the explorations deep under the ocean are saying that the hull was blown out, not thrown in. So it was definitely, they needed to get rid of all those opposing the Federal Reserve, and so they did.
And that gave rise to Jekyll Island. Jane, also jump in whenever you want to, guys. I'm not controlling mics here, just keep the mics open. But, the sinking of the Titanic, Jane, as you know, that wasn't even the ship that sunk. The Titanic didn't sink. Speak to that.
It was the Olympia. They switched it out. Of course, J.P. Morgan moved all his beautiful antiques out before it sunk. And they killed John Astor and Guggenheim and Isidorus Strauss on that ship, who were the three mainstays that were opposing them financially, got rid of them, literally drowned them out in the true sense of the word, and established the Federal Reserve System. And that was one of what I call the subterranean Psyops, which are in and of themselves the main Psyops that are underneath all the little Psyops. That one I call the robber baron financial control Psyop. And then going back, just want to say to the education system Psyop in 1903, that was another subterranean Psyop, which set the stage for all these little false flags to start blowing up all over the place. And we actually accepted them and took it at face value, that what was happening in the world. But meantime, it was all just being set up to put the fear of everything, including God, into us.
Very good. So then we move on to, obviously, the Spanish flu of 1918 was a seminal piece. Forgive me. Spanish flu 1918 was really the introduction of the full weaponization of public health through the First World War, introducing vaccinations as well and normalizing that kind of intervention into the human body. So Spanish flu was without a doubt a psyop. Scores of millions died resultantly. That was by engineered, manufactured. We pretty much know that in the same way that SARS-CoV-19 falls into that category. Fascism here, I'm not quite sure what the connection is, but by all means, speak to this, guys.
Well, you have I.G. Farben, who financed Hitler, that, with the corporations, then the Nuremberg trials, they were broken up into the common commercials you see today, those corporations. And when you look back at the early 1900s, what happened with the Rockefeller Foundation, where they were found guilty of a lot of different things. They basically hijacked our whole medical system. They my great-grandfather was the president of Homeopathic Medical Society, going up against Rockefeller in the early 1900s. They basically shut down all the natural paths and methods that have been used for ages to instead use petroleum-based pharmaceuticals. They took over control of the education of the doctors, and you have to be certified. And so we have the corrupt medical system today that is basically based on maximizing financial profit and not in interest of a person's total health and well-being. And you look at the CDC that I mentioned earlier that was brought in with a lot of eugenicists and things. They seem to be on board. Rockefellers, as you know, have a history of being involved with eugenics, and that their objective, and it seems quite apparent with all the things being done in the world, to reduce the population.
I mean, this picture here of the polio is just next level, isn't it? Absolutely horrendous image. You know, polio was one of the biggest psyops as well. Polio happened because of DDT, because of the systemic poisoning of all through monoculture and agriculture by these central motherfuckers who poisoned all the soil using DDT. And that brought about polio resultantly, and that became endemic around the world. And then they cured polio with vaccines, or at least that was the psyop. The vaccines didn't cure polio, but when they introduced the vaccines, they withdrew DDT. And so people start thinking, well, the vaccines must be responsible. That was a brilliant psyop. And that's what normalized vaccinations. And that's what gave every idiot around the breakfast table reading the New York Times or listening to the BBC radio buying into that psyop. And so mothers and fathers and uncles and aunts all around the world agreed with medical science. Well, it must be a marvel that we inject our children. And so what happened? Bada boom. Every child started getting vaccinated in school, you know, once or twice and 3 or 4 times, like I was back in the Rhodesian War in the 1970s. Just a couple of vaccinations there, you know, us war babies. Nowadays in America, how many vaccinations? The average child? It's off the chart. Off the chart. Horrendous.
Sacha, can I just say here at this point that my blood is beginning to boil, and just thinking about all these things that they've done. And I'd like to mention and thank Janet Ossobod for all her work she did on the fall of the cabal, because she was steeped in it to such an extent that she did end up committing suicide. So I just want to thank her for her work, and her partner, Cinta. And then going back, we must address, going back to those pictures of the Nazis and the war, we must address Tavistock and the think tanks and what they have done to foment all this nasty business running throughout the pharmaceutical industry, the educational industry. They were the ones that seduced Americans into going to war when they weren't interested. They were the ones who pushed war. They were the ones who put the posters out. They were the ones who had the think tanks running around on the ground delivering all those posters that says your country needs you and women for war. You know, they were the ones who convinced women, let's go back to the Eternal Mother again. They were the ones who convinced women to kill their own species through their ad campaign, which is almost unheard of. And I don't know where the Eternal Mother was at that time. I wish she had stepped in at some point, but they had her hidden in a closet somewhere in the back and she had no voice. And that is how many of those things happen.
Very good. Okay. Well, let's go back to this 1940, the formation of the United Nations, World Health Organization. The United Nations itself was the gift given to humanity by the parent corporation after war, which had been engineered. But of course, you know, we're going to ensure that war never happens like that again. So we'll all come together. The League of Nations basically morphed into which was an all boys club, morphed into the United Nations, which is an all boys club. Club of Rome issues therefrom, and these other institutions. David Rockefeller, of course, being the most well-known progenitor of that particular boys club. And then, obviously 1947, the genesis of the CIA. Speak to this, Dan.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. The CIA, the Air Force, and MJ-12 all created right after the Roswell incident. And this was pushed by, as I mentioned, by Alan Dulles. Yeah, all the false flag wars that we've done, like I got involved going in combat action in Vietnam because of the Gulf of Tonkin, and these situations that the thing that really bothers me is the medical situation, because so many people are suffering on this planet. A lot of pain and suffering is needless because of these medical technologies. And this is something I became involved in regarding the holographic medical science that's being kept from humanity. Once we can clean house with these dark elements, and the first step is becoming aware that they even exist. As we mentioned earlier, it's too hard for people to comprehend that such a conspiracy, I guess you could say, has actually happened on this planet. Once we can clean house, then we can join the Galactic Federation of many civilizations across the galaxy that have this advanced technology that could extend our lives without, anything could be cured, because you can go back in time. You can go to a point where your body was optimal, overlay it, and it morphs into that. So it's incredible technology. I have many, many friends that have experienced it firsthand. I worked with Dr. Marcel Vogel on a device that was patent, that could tune backwards and forwards in time, that substantiated the principles that you can tune through the holographic matrix of time and pull out individual segments. And like my friend Jen Hanna-Redion says, the universe tends to perfection. So when you overlay that onto a person's body, it morphs into that. So it's incredible technologies that need to be released to the world. And this corrupt medical system that, you have the Nuremberg trials that established the international law of informed consent, which, as we all know, was not adhered to.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Very good. Okay. Let's talk about this. Pan Am. Jane, you've got the floor.
This is a really excellent example of like, we didn't do it, because here's Gaddafi, a really good leader. He's taking care of his people. He's giving thousands of pounds to people who get married. He's building an incredible waterway called the Great Rivers Waterway. He's extending that to Africa. He's a pan-Africanist. He's not really a pan-Arabist or whatever it is. And now he's bringing in a gold asset-backed currency for his country. He wants to extend that to Africa too. And along comes Hillary Clinton. We saw, he died. And going backwards from there, you'll see that terrible Lockerbie disaster, the Pan Am Flight 103, that one was blamed on him. It was never him. They found one guy that they threw in jail for it. He ended up having a prostate cancer, so they let him out after killing 270 people. Then later on, it was blamed on Iran, but they built up, they had that one, and then they had another one over Niger, over the desert, where they blew up another plane, blamed it on Libya, had this crazy forensic results. Now, Libya's Gaddafi is this dictator. He's a horrible man. It's all over the newspapers. Everyone gets behind him. There's sanctions on the country. Now, please tell me how those people of Libya are to blame, because they tried, he was doing his best for them. and they were working with him. And in the end, they lost everything. His beautiful water cascading ideas were all bombed and destroyed. And the negative press was insane. They even showed some of the water ducts with graffiti all over it and dead bodies lying around it. And they took it to the hilt. So now there's one man in charge of an entire country that can't even move forward for the planet Earth, for humanity. So
Indeed.
how do we deal with this?
And there he is with his female bodyguards. He was a sensible chap, only trusted women with his life, and they certainly did a bloody good job of looking after him. He was highly emancipated in so many ways. I never met with Gaddafi. I met with Saif, his son, and I was somewhat instrumental in negotiating a stay of execution of his son a number of years ago. I haven't publicly spoken about that little mission that I was involved with, but it was very interesting, and I think I may just speak about it. I'm rather hoping and trusting that due process will prevail, and that Gaddafi's family will rekindle the flames of hope within the people of Libya after the United States and the imperialists and the globalists have completely fucked that country up. But indeed, it's a worthy story, Jane, because this is a classic example of a man who came to power lawfully and legitimately, and then was essentially in power long enough to work out the game. And that was the point. He was in power long enough to work out the game that all leaders of the utility for 4 years or 8 years of the globalist enterprise, the invisible hand, unless you can stay in power, which he managed to do long enough to see the game and then begin to move against it in an intelligent way. Don't forget, this man Gaddafi used to stay at the White House in his own goat hair tent on the lawn of the White House. He wouldn't sleep. He never slept one night in a bed. He refused to. He was an honorable, decent, good, funky human being, a very interesting man. Now, I've sat down in my own living room with the head of the Libyan Democratic Party, Ahmed Shibani, who's a delightful soul, but a libtard, as we would put it. And I'm sorry, Ahmed, if you're watching this. You're a wonderful man, and I enjoyed your company on many occasions at my home. But, you know, you are an asset to the liberal intellectual class, and that's probably why we're no longer friends. But the point being, and the point being that these people who took over Libya are completely the utility of the globalist hand. And Gaddafi, God love him, was trying his best to level the playing field, to reintroduce a pan-African currency, get Africa out of the hegemony of this imperial West, the neo-colonialism. And that incident is happening now anyway, many years later. A lot of very good leaders in Africa are resurrecting and reclaiming Africa. So we're going to see that sea change in the year 2024 into the year 2025. Gaddafi would be very proud, were he alive now, to see that his death was not in vain. Let's leave him alone there momentarily. Let's talk about this, 9/11. Obviously, this is the big one. Dan, your immediate thoughts when you see anything connected to
I have a little quick share screen on Gaddafi, if I could. This journalist, a 25-year senior journalist, he was a non-official cover. He was a whistleblower. He's passed away since then, but he was given information by the CIA to go against Gaddafi. And he said, I had no bad information about Gaddafi, but the CIA gave this, and he felt guilty about it, and so he came public. I just wanted to share that about this wonderful journalist who revealed that the journalists are non-official covers for, and if they're ever exposed, they have to, say they had nothing to do with it. But 9/11, well, everybody who's been paying attention, all the glitches in the matrix on that one, from the Pentagon attack to the Bushes and the what was in the Building 7, and everything. It's just it's kind of like a dead horse, 9/11.
Let me summarize that one because I'm quite good at it. And I believe, according to Scotty Sachs, I'm the first voice to have been allowed onto mainstream news or mainstream networks in the United States on this subject. This was about 3 years ago, I think in 2000, that I did a 2 or 3 hour live broadcast on Sovereign Radio, which did go mainstream. It was a mainstream broadcast, and I was given special permission, or at least the network were, to allow my voice to be uncensored. Okay, and I did, in the course of that interview, outline the abomination that is the connection between the creature of Jekyll Island, the sinking of the Titanic or the Olympia, the emergence of the Federal Reserve, the risible part that fetid little toad of a politician Woodrow Wilson played in that venal exercise, establishing the Federal Reserve, complete illicit, illegal, unlawful hegemony over the wealth of nations, and the indentureship of all of humanity into debt and into debt slavery, and how the Federal Reserve then essentially led to the need to protect the enclave, which was what the CIA was all about, essentially. The enclave that came in to protect that globalist enterprise. That globalist enterprise was also containing and controlling the hub of military intelligence, OSS and all of that. We move on into the formation of the United Nations and the shit show that has prevailed. But the point here is that the Clintons, Bill Clinton, at that time when he was the governor of Arkansas, by best accounts, allegedly, have to say that, folks, allegedly, by best accounts, Bill Clinton, whilst governor of Arkansas, was running the biggest drug ring in modern history. Okay, 2 young boys happened to be in the woods next to the small private airfield close to the governor's mansion of Arkansas, where Bill Clinton was the governor. And 2 little boys' bodies were found on the rail track, dead. Accident. Or was it? Well, investigators came in, decided that the boys' deaths were not an accident. The boys must have seen something and been murdered, placed on the tracks. What could they have seen? Well, from where those tracks were, where the bodies were found, was the airfield, a good, clear view to the airfield, where, by best accounts, these boys had seen a drug drop, and so were then dispatched and murdered. The investigation of the murder of those 2 boys eventually was connected to a man called David Koresh, who was connected to the intelligence community. David Koresh, if you remember, was then conflated into being that cult figure who created some sex cult, and the Waco, Texas massacre happened at his compound. First time in history that the federal government moved its guns against citizens. That was a psyop. That was a big line in the sand. So they needed to silence Koresh because Koresh and his connections to the intelligence community were on top of the fact that the biggest drug trafficking at that time is being run out of the governor's mansion in Arkansas. Okay, pretty serious stuff. Directly connected to the Bush clan as well, incidentally, which is brought into the fray the White House, the Oval Office, and the government. So the cover-up of Waco, the massacre happened. Men, women, and children were murdered by the federal government at the compound. The press, being the whores of Satan that they are, were used and gave themselves up to tell lies about David Koresh and about what was going on at that compound. He was a mad cult leader who was turning his guns against the federal government, really, and you bought it, hook, line, and sinker. More shame you. He was murdered, as were those women and children. Nonetheless, years later, other good investigators, good Eagle Scouts in those agencies, and there are good Eagle Scouts in the CIA, in the FBI, NYPD, LAPD, Interpol, all of the agencies had good souls in them and brave and noble souls in them. There was a battle of good and evil taking place in all of those agencies. And good guys in the agencies began to composite the forensic evidences and the whatever was required to do the indictments on the, by best accounts, the Clinton-Bush cartel. And those evidences were being stored where? Oh, that would be the Oklahoma City building, which, if you remember, fell into its footprints because some chap called Timothy McVeigh, the perfect Manchurian candidate, with a backpack, walked in and brought a 16-story building to its knees. I don't think so. That doesn't happen ballistically, friends. Cannot happen. Timothy McVeigh was a classic mindfuck Manchurian candidate, fringe asset of the CIA and the intelligence community. And that backpack bomb was a nonsense. The whole building was sunk into its footprint in order to destroy the evidences. That's what happened. The evidences that would have outed the White House, would have outed so much, so many of the portals of power would have been exposed. And that was then investigated. Waco was investigated. That led to Oklahoma collapse of that building. Oklahoma City building was investigated. It took years, and all the evidences on the digital servers connecting the drugs, the airfield, the murder of those boys, Waco, Texas compound massacre, Oklahoma City building. Where were all of the evidences and investigations being housed? World Trade Center number 7 on 9/11. That's why that building fell into its footprint. It was all part of a cleanup operation. So that's the big story there, Dan, connecting really this pathology of wickedness that's prevailed at the highest levels of power in Washington, D.C., essentially. And all of these agencies will come down resultantly when all of this is exposed in the fullness of time. Jane, touch briefly on the importance of this.
Well, that would be contemporary art or modern art, which is also one of the greatest hidden, invisible, but straight up in your face psyops that you could ever come across. The distortion of the human psyche put into your face over and over and over and over again. Where you look around, it's almost like visual MK Ultra. And
but Jane, darling, this is art, darling. This is modern art. It's worth a fortune, this stuff. What are you talking about?
Well, it's absolutely beautiful. I love it. But I don't know what it's doing to me when I look at it.
So, and that's part of the great work that you've done, Jane, is you've exposed modern art as being one of the biggest psyops. You've exposed the Renaissance as being one of the biggest psyops in history. And you've exposed cave art as being one of the biggest psyops in history. We've been into that, and the audience can go back and check those archives. But it's big stuff, and it's important stuff because, again, that what you've been doing through your work is to expose the fact that totemism, iconoclasticism, iconography, the use of image, word, is vital to dream spelling humanity, into predictably programming us, into writing the story for us. And what we're trying to do here, friends, he says, turning to the audience, is invite you to begin to write the story. We need to now write the story. We need to resurrect and reclaim the kingdom of heaven on earth. It's going to happen as consciousness in action, divine acts of will. We have all the power and the majesty coursing through our Christed blood to be able to overwrite these satanic programs and arcane stories and the bullshit installations, psycho-civilization. We have all the power and the majesty to be able to transmute and transcend through absolution, redemption. That is the greatest act of will, incidentally, is to absolve, is to forgive. That's the point here. So look, we're drawing now to the end. We haven't even consulted the audience. I have to consult the audience. Dan, just your reflections briefly on the journey of the last 2 hours.
Oh, regarding the story, and just can I do a very fast
Please.
Share screen? Both BBC and CNN were given the story, the script before Building 7 went down. So they were, you can stop the share screen. So the mainstream media that forms the public's perception is the enemy of the people, absolutely, and has been, and that's why we have the situation we do in the world, and I'm looking forward to the time when we gain control of our information systems, so that we are no longer deceived into this false realities. And it's an honor to join you on doing this education series on, because that's sort of key. People need to understand this reality in order to transform it.
Very good. Beautiful. Thank you. Well, let's get some audience participation here. How do we leave a system with nowhere to go? Not sure how to answer that particular question. Andy's asking, why only 62 people? Actually, they're not, Andy. There are thousands of people watching. I've got the real numbers here. It is a record audience, actually, for Lazarus Symposium. So I can assure you of that. We've got a very considerable audience watching this live. You might be just looking at one syndicated channel, and that might be some small fringe channel connected to our syndication, but that doesn't mean it's 62 people. There's thousands of people in the room. Okay, friends, audience, please, if you have any particular questions that you want to raise, do so. I just received a slightly rude message from a friend of mine, Sarah, a dear friend, who says that bullshit, the polio, the vaccines were introduced not connected to polio. Well, that's not my understanding. I've looked at this subject. I'll look at it even deeper, but my understanding it is absolutely they corresponded. But let's take a look at that as we move forward. Again, today's show here is a summary, a summarization of where we're taking this greater narrative. So I'm going to ask the audience, please, don't forget mustard gas, which was repurposed as chemotherapy. Absolutely, Valerie. Very good point. I'm going to ask the audience here to please only now raise any questions you may have of Jane or of Dan or of myself, or if there's anything in particular that needs correcting in what we've spoken to, by all means add a comment. And thirdly, if we've missed any particular element in this discourse on historical Psyops, and we may have missed one or two, please also just fire those in, and our producer will take a note of your comments, and we'll see if we can thread that into the narrative. Is there a website people can find others according to zip code? Don't know what that means. Sorry. Jane, unmute, and your comments on the conversation thus far.
Well, what it tells me is that they've corralled humanity into doing their work for them, all of our creativity, all of our gifts, everything that we have, even our love, they play on. And they've used it, they've turned it and used it for their agenda and what they want to build. So it's time to take that away from them. This is addressing the woman who said, where do we go? What system do we go to if we can't live in this one? Go and build it yourself. Take your creativity, take everything you have, your creation currency, which is your most valuable asset, and make something else for humanity's future, for humanity's positive conscious evolution.
Very good. Very good. Sorry, my friend just wrote to me and said, no, she was agreeing when she said total BS. She wasn't saying what we were saying was total bullshit. She was speaking against the system. So she's agreeing. She's saying that polio and the vaccines were correct. So thank you. That qualifies that point. Who else is asking something salient here? What was in Building 7? I just told you, darling. I just went into great length to explain what was in Building number 7. I'm not going to do it again. Where can you hear more from Jane? You can't. I control the woman's voice. I'm her 60% man. You can get to her through me. I'm the Jesuit. No, joke. You could see a lot of Jane's work with Lazarus Symposium. I think I lay claim to the greatest aspect of her intelligence in the Lazarus Symposium over the last couple of years. But Jane, where else can people find you?
Well, I have a website with my art and everything. JaneEvershedArt.com. That's it.
Very good. Same question being asked of you, Dan. I know you only recently came out of the closet and sort of gone somewhat public, but where do people find you other than in the conversations that we're going to be having?
You know, after I went to Washington, a media company wanted me to write an article on the control of media and the extraterrestrial issue. And so I started researching, and so I ended up putting it up. I didn't stop researching since they asked me to do that. Thewebmatrix.net. And the work that I'm doing with authorization of the Galactic Federation of Worlds with Jen Hanna-Redian bringing in technology is on marcelvogel.org. IBM's head scientist site in his honor in the development of technology of crystals. Those are the two websites, thewebmatrix.net and marcelvogel.org.
And just to underscore that, I'm planning to work very closely with Dan and Elena in order to exemplify what it is that they're doing, this extraordinary breakthrough technological pioneering work that they're doing. It's my intention to dedicate much of my network and platforming next year to get that out to the world. I think it's desperately important stuff and greatly looking forward to bringing it forth. It is so, so, so exciting, friends. If you thought that the Hindu epics and the Bhagavad Gita was riveting stuff, brace yourself for what's coming out through Dan and Elena and the revelations that they're bringing into the world, which do come from the celestial realms as far as I'm concerned. Now, just to address this question here from Danny Ruthless, I love that name. I want to call myself Ruthless. I'm going to make a note of that. I love it. Can they harvest souls via these heavy metal injections? I'm definitely an expert on the subject, and essentially the answer to that question is yes, they can. If you figure that saturating the biological technology of the human being with these hydrogels and graphene oxides and bariums and phosphates and lead and aluminum and mercury and all of these other nanoparticulates is essentially creating a perfect antenna system, which with the Skynet beamed weaponized electromagnetic frequency intervention, dialing information into the biological system by virtue of that antenna matrix, the short answer is yes. This is cyborg, AI, robotics, bioengineering that is taking place. It's been largely experimental, but I believe that they've got it down to a fine art. And the zombification of humanity is definitely one of the existential threats facing us as a direct result of the heavy metal injections being a seminal piece of it. We don't have time to get into that any further. I'm just going to quickly glance one last time. Will there be an EBS announced soon? That's not a question for this symposium. We all have our ideas about that. Okay, friends, I think that's about it. Christy, give me a thumbs up in the green room if it's good to transition. Okay, very good. So that's pretty much it, friends. We are 2 hours and 6 minutes in. We managed to get through that chronology of principle Psyops that really describe the trauma pattern of our civilizational model, our civilizational wheel. And the bit about how do we absolve that, redeem that, and move that into mass ceremonial absolution and redemption, that's where we're going to be going next with our story. Again, it comes back to this image here of the eternal mother, the grandmother, a return of the talking stick or the power rod to the eternal mother, a restoration of relationship between living sons and daughters of God and the living soil, exemplified by the grandmother and the spirit of the grandmother, the great wisdom keeper the great flame keeper, the nurturer, the healer. And the circle of humanity in front of her is the rekindling of the flame of the fellowship of man, the highest and greatest currency that we have as a species. And this will be manifested in real time, Midsummer's Day of the year 2025. We're negotiating this to be at Standing Rock, and we will be lighting an eternal flame from central sun as it passes over midday through magnification glass, and we will light a flame, and that flame will pass onto torches held by living representatives of each of the Native American tribes. We will be bringing a living representative of one of each of these many hundreds of tribes. We're not sure if it's 500, 550, 650, 633. We're looking right now to make that designation, but it's over 500 tribes will be brought in, living representatives. Now, you'll all be invited to participate. We're going to need to raise the funds for this. I anticipate a $2 million budget, baseline budget for this, to produce this event and bring it about. But we will do it, and we will bring together a living representative of all of the American tribes, peoples of the Americas, in order to stand in that circle of fire. And they'll hold fire torches, and that will be the circle of humanity. It will be probably 2/3 of a kilometer in circumference by my rudimentary mathematics. And as that flame is lit, we are going to be transporting that flame across the land somewhere. I can't speak about that right now, but it's a very exciting project, and it's very substantial in the totemistic value that it has for humanity. We have to do these kinds of things. We are being psychologically managed and emotionally programmed, psycho-civilizationally. We have to end that programming, and we have to start to dream wisely. We have to start to ideate. The ideas that we hold in the mind are essential, because they are what ultimately manifest in the field. One of the segments in the show later today are coming up in a few hours from now. This is the Crystalline Conversations, Unlocking Water's Quantum Codes with Vida Austin. It's a very coy photograph of Vida. She's a wonderful woman and very brilliant. And this woman has done the most amazing forensic photography that I think I've ever seen in my life, demonstrating that water is fully alive, fully conscious. We are water. The oceans are water. The earth is water. So what we think through the conduit of water manifests. What Dan Willis is doing with Elena Danaan is taking that phenomenon even further. That's a hell of a statement for a long-haired mortal to make. But it's the truth, because the piezoelectric crystalline technology and the angles of the lattice work of the crystals that are cut, and the platinum and copper wiring that needs to be threaded in a certain configuration that creates the piezoelectric technology that Dan and Elena Danaan are bringing through from Gen Han Radion, our Galactic Federation Command. This is hyperdimensional physics, friends. This is the most exciting fucking breakthrough in geometry, mathematics, and physics. And they're showing us, through Dan and Elena, how to build piezoelectric handheld devices that will do three things. And Dan, jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. One, ultimately be able to power up, or essentially be able to power up energy, an energy source. Also, and more importantly, a radiant healing technology to harmonize frequencies and reset the geometry of so-called atoms and cells into equilibrium, meaning to say radiant healing, just like the ancient Tatarian temples and buildings and totems were doing back in the day. And thirdly, in my view, most importantly, this very advanced fifth dimensional piezoelectric technology that Dan and Elena are bringing to the world is going to also be a capacitor for massively augmenting and accelerating our capacity to ideate and manifest in real time. Is that fair?
Yes. healing technologies that have not been seen since the ancient days of Atlantis. Yes, it's true. So regarding the power generation, the technology is sharing is how they power their entire planet on the planet era, but we are not allowed yet to do that until the control structure is taken down and dismantled on this planet. So it's not really safe to bring out the energy technologies, but it does have the healing attributes and the aspect of changing the collective reality through our consciousness and being able to go into the singularity with our consciousness and change the reality is something that I've been very humbled and honored to learn from a scientist that has understandings that are thousands of years ahead of ours, and we're continuing to learn more.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Okay, friends, that's pretty much it. That wraps it up for the day. Jane, your closing comments.
I'd just like to say thank you for everything, and it was an honor to be here today, and your audience is wonderful, and I really, really enjoyed being here, and I got to get back to work and find some more information.
Very good. Dan, closing thoughts from you.
Oh, just honor. As we mentioned earlier, it's like when evil happens is because people do nothing. So once you become aware, and the audience that you have is intelligent and pretty savvy and has done a lot of research, and a lot of these things are, turning on, elements in their memory. So once we have basically addressed the situation in the past, now it's a time to transform it, and we have the abilities to do so.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Well, Dan, thank you so very much. Jane, thank you so very much. So happy to spend time with you guys, and greatly looking forward to this journey together with you. Friends, he said, turning to the audience, thank you, thousands of you, for being here at the start of this symposium. Anyone wanting to watch the rest of the symposium, go to, as you can see at the footer, lazarusinitiative.com. Christy is going to be triggering the next segment imminently. But thank you indeed, all of you, for joining us today. It's a very exciting lineup we've got. The next piece is on Hyperborea, and this is something which is connected loosely to the notions of Shambhala, Utopia, Garden of Eden, and so on and so forth. The extraordinary academic, who's actually a politician, he's a former politician and an academic, and I don't think his time in politics is over, incidentally, in Europe, but he's a very interesting guy. He was somewhat cautious about coming forth onto Lazarus in this symposium, and I tell you, I had to pretty much convince him to do so. What he knows is remarkable. He knows about Hyperborea. He, I think, is probably born to the subject to educate the world about it and help to rekindle a renaissance or a return in that sense to Hyperborea. Yes, it almost certainly was a real place. We need to break the notion that Hyperborea is mythological, in the same way that we need to break the mythos that the Garden of Eden and Shambhala were mythological. They are very real. They are the immanent template of the immortal, the divine, which is the true aspect of you and I. But only once we make that determination and reclaim sovereign jurisdiction, assume our Christed mantle fully, and then move into the resurrection flame, which of course was exemplified by the great Master Jesus and other great sages and prophets in so-called history. I'll leave it at that. Just thank you all for being here. This is the 30th symposium. Very excited about where we go in the year 2024. Look forward to seeing you in January. Much love. We're signing out now. Dan, thanks, brother. Thanks, Jane.